They didn't even recognize him at first. Not until he quietly stood from the back row. Shoulders straight, eyes steady. For 20 years, they thought he was dead, a family myth. A ghost tucked away behind metals no one ever saw. But here he was, alive, in the flesh, standing tall at his younger brother's promotion ceremony. The silence in the hall didn't come from shock. It came from guilt. You could hear the air tighten. Every eye turned toward the man no one expected, the one they thought had disappeared. But this was no return for applause. It was a reckoning, slow, sharp, and long overdue. Daniel Grayson never fought his mother that morning. She stirred her coffee the way she always did when she was about to speak with finality. She wasn't cruel, just certain. Not everyone's. Meant to be special, she said gently. Daniel had just turned 19. He was fresh out of training, proud of his uniform, eager to make his family proud. She added, some people help others shine. That matters too. She smiled as if that made it better, but Daniel carried those words like bruises no one could see. He heard them in every family dinner. Every Thanksgiving where his brother Benjamin got the spotlight. Nobody ever called Daniel a failure. They didn't have to. Their silence handled that just fine. When Benjamin received another promotion, his second in 5 years, the house lit up. Social media posts, congratulations, joyful calls. But when Daniel came back from 6 months on a Black Ops mission in East Africa, he got no welcome, no ride from the airport, just a voicemail from his father that said, you're always off somewhere. He had saved lives, crossed borders that didn't officially exist, and almost died doing it. But on Thanksgiving, he had to give up his seat at the table for a neighbor's son who had just gotten into law school. Daniel ate by the sink on a paper plate. His medals stayed in the garage, forgotten in a dusty box. That night, Daniel made a quiet decision. He was done trying to be seen. He had survived too much to keep begging for recognition, but fate doesn't care when you bow out. A month before Benjamin's big day, Daniel was assigned to observe a military simulation at Fort Raleigh. He was in a uniform, just present, a name on a list. No one in the room paid him any mind until General Aldridge entered. The entire room shifted when the general walked in. He scanned every face, then his gaze locked on Daniel. The general froze mid-step. Then he saluted, sharp and loud, Sir, General Grayson, it's an honor. The words rang like a bell through the room. Everyone stopped, every head turned, not toward Benjamin, not toward their father, toward Daniel. It wasn't pride that hit him. It was something older, deeper. It was finally being seen. Daniel Grayson, the eldest son in a family built on military tradition. His father, Henry, had been a decorated Air Force colonel. His mother, Lillian, a respected battlefield medic. His brothers had followed the path. Lucas earned medals. Benjamin became the face of the family, the golden boy. He gave perfect speeches and looked great in every photo. Daniel, he had vanished before his story was allowed to begin. They thought he dropped out of West Point, that he wasn't strong enough. The truth, he had been handpicked into a covert intelligence unit before graduation, a program that didn't take photos, that didn't hold public ceremonies, that didn't leave evidence. He worked in shadows for 2 decades, slipping through borders, saving lives, and watching from a distance while his brothers shined. His letters home had fake return addresses, his presence erased from every family picture. A cousin once said casually that they had to crop a photo, too many people, but everyone knew who had been cut. He had written a strategy that saved 30 civilians in Beirut. He had stayed underground for days in Tunisia to help a recon team escape. He had survived Ember Echo, though he lost 3 teammates and a part of himself he'd never get back. But no one told those stories at dinner. They didn't come with press releases. So, they didn't count. Then came the call from his mother. Flat. Cold. Ben's getting promoted. You should come. Don't wear anything that draws attention. He said, I'll be there. Not to make peace. To see, just once, if anyone would look at him and truly see the man who returned. That night, Daniel pulled out his old dress uniform, still folded with care, still sharp with the scent of a ceremony that never happened. He packed it beneath a plain shirt and slacks. No rank, no medals. He wasn't there to show off. He just wanted to exist, beside his own name. The house hadn't changed. Same beige walls, stiff with pride, same porch swing creaking in the wind. Daniel stood for a moment before stepping in, boots brushing the gravel like old habits returning. Inside, the air smelled like lemons and furniture polish, cold to clean. His mother was at the dining table, arranging place cards without looking up. "Change your shirt," she said. "You're sitting next to Benjamin. Don't distract him. No hug, no glance, just instructions." Like always, his father nodded. Once, "Good you came," then checked his watch. Benjamin arrived later, glowing as always. His uniform shined as if it had been buffed by a team. He worked the room like a politician, handshakes, jokes, perfect timing. When he got to Daniel, he said lightly, "This is my older brother. He served too, but now he's an admin or something." Someone laughed. A cousin whispered, "VA office? Better than nothing, I guess." Daniel didn't react. He didn't need to. Truth doesn't need to be shouted, not when it's sitting in your bones. The house walls were a shrine. Photos of Lucas at graduation, Benjamin receiving awards, but not a single one of Daniel since 2003. He was either missing or cropped out. A young niece wandered over, eyes wide. "Did you ever shoot a real gun?" she asked. Hoping Daniel crouched beside her. "I once made a plan that saved 30 soldiers. No gunfire, just brains. That's better, don't you think?" She blinked, nodded, then ran off. Dinner was small, just family and a few officers. Benjamin was the star. He hosted smoothly, smiled at the right moments. When someone complimented his calm, he smiled and said, "I've been practicing my speech. I want people to understand. Sometimes courage isn't leaving, it's staying." The jab landed soft but sharp. Daniel felt it. He said nothing, because real strength knows when to wait. Later, on the porch, Daniel sat alone. The breeze carried old memories. Inside, the house buzzed with chatter. Out here, the silence felt like truth. Down by the field, a band rehearsed, muffled notes rising, then fading again. Tomorrow, he would sit in the back row. He wouldn't wear rank. He wouldn't speak. He would let his brother have his moment. But truth doesn't ask for permission, and when it finally arrives, it doesn't wait. The next morning, Fort Raleigh was dressed for ceremony. Rows of chairs in perfect formation, polished floors, officers seated in order. Daniel sat third row from the back. His seat was labeled family, unassigned. A nice way of saying, "You're here, but don't belong." To his left, a nervous fiancé twisted a bracelet. To his right, an aunt wore too much perfume. Daniel sat still. Straight. Quiet. At the front, Benjamin stood behind the podium, flag to one side, brass to the other. His speech was practiced, proud. He talked about duty, integrity, climbing the ranks. Then came the twist. He said, "In this uniform, there's no space for those who abandon the sacred trust." The pause afterward was deliberate. He didn't say Daniel's name. He didn't have to. Daniel felt it, a punch without hands. Still, he stayed seated, unmoved. There were no medals on his chest, but the scars beneath the surface told their own story. Then something shifted. A whisper rippled from the front rows. "Is that her?" From Operation Silencer, another voice. "No, him. That's him. The ghost from Ember Echo." They weren't looking at Benjamin anymore. They were staring at Daniel. Recognition spread like fire. And then, the doors opened. General Aldridge entered without a word, but the room straightened. As if pulled by invisible thread, his eyes scanned. The crowd. They stopped on Daniel. The general moved. Fast. He marched across the room, every step louder than the last. He stopped beside Daniel, raised his hand in salute. "Sir, General Grayson, it's an honor to see you again." Silence crushed the room. Benjamin froze. His note card shook. Daniel stood, returned the salute. Calm, solid. He had nothing to prove, but everything to confirm. Behind him, a glass shattered. His mother's hand had slipped. His father sat halfway up, then dropped back into his chair like air had left his body. A voice whispered, "That's him, the ghost commander from Ember Echo." The name traveled like lightning. Benjamin tried to speak, tried to recover, but the moment had snapped. The room wasn't listening anymore. They were recalculating everything they thought they knew. The ceremony ended. Applause was weak. Empty. Benjamin stopped Daniel by the exit. His grip was tight. His voice low. "You let me go up there like that. Was that your plan?" Daniel looked at him, calm as ever. "If the truth shrinks you," he said, "you were never standing tall to begin with." Benjamin said nothing. Daniel walked away, not proud, just free, Asterisk there was on the desk. A plain manila envelope. No name. No markings. Just sitting there like it had been waiting. Daniel opened it slowly. Inside, a printed email. Subject line. Reckless operation. Civilian casualties. The wording was surgical. Cold. It accused the CD Grayson of leading an unsanctioned mission that had harmed civilians. The exact wording matched a classified report Daniel had reviewed himself. 1. Only 3 people had ever seen. One of those 3 had been a junior analyst back then. Benjamin. Daniel sat there without moving. No anger. Not yet. Just that drowning feeling, like betrayal settling into his chest with slow weight. He folded the email, slid it into his jacket, left the room. He found Benjamin outside, standing beneath patio lights, still in uniform, still. Perfect. Daniel didn't yell. He just held up the email. You send this. Benjamin glanced at it once, then said flatly, yes. Daniel paused. Why? Benjamin's shoulders slumped just slightly, like a curtain had dropped. Because you weren't supposed to win. He said, you left. You didn't stay and grind like the rest of us. And yet, they still talked about you, even when you were gone. Daniel didn't speak. Benjamin went on. I thought if I erased you, maybe they'd finally see me. Daniel breathed in through his nose, then answered, quiet but clear. You know leaking classified material is a criminal offense. Benjamin flinched, but didn't reply. Daniel didn't push. He just turned and walked away. Before sunrise, the alarm blared, not the base's usual tone. This one was sharp, urgent. Daniel's phone lit up. Emergency protocol. Report to Strategic Coordination Center. He moved fast. No time to think. Uniform. Badge. Clearance. Fort Raleigh was already alive with motion. Lights flashing. Officers shouting. Systems blinking with warnings. At the command center, a sergeant handed him a file. It was already open to the only page that mattered. A breach. A classified file from Operation Silencer had been leaked 3 hours earlier. Source. Internal. Worse, the leak was traced to Daniel's old credentials. His retired login ID. It was a nightmare, and he hadn't even had time to speak yet. Within the hour, he was seated across from General Aldridge and 2 military intelligence officers. No cuffs, no accusations, but the air was heavy with suspicion. He handed over everything. Every message, every log, but something didn't feel right. The email, the one Benjamin had sent, there was something about the metadata, something Daniel hadn't checked before. He asked for server logs, dug deeper, searched for the origin point. And then it hit him. The email wasn't just shady. It had used an old, decommissioned system, one that hadn't been touched in years. Benjamin had used a legacy link. That link triggered an automatic system, one that attached a dormant classified file. A file that should have stayed buried. It wasn't just reckless. It was a chain reaction. And now it had exploded. The breach was real. The damage was spreading. And the trail pointed straight to Daniel. But the origin? That came from home. Daniel stood in the server room, staring at the timestamp. The file wasn't stolen. It had been triggered. By mistake. Benjamin had clicked a link he didn't understand. But the system didn't care about intent. It only cared about results. And this mistake had caused international fallout. General Aldridge called for a closed session. 3 chairs on one side, 1 chair on the other. Daniel sat alone, but not powerless. He requested something rare, permission to lead the investigation himself. It was risky, but Aldridge didn't interrupt. Daniel laid out everything, digital footprints, link activations, server pings. When he finished, Aldridge stood, walked around the table, offered a hand. The floor is yours, General. The task force formed within hours. Daniel read the roster. His chest tightened. His father, Henry, was assigned to oversee classified archives. His mother, Lillian, was placed in forensic trace analysis. And Benjamin, the source of it all, was named system liaison. It wasn't protection. It was necessity. They were part of the breach. Now, they were part of the cleanup. The first meeting was icy. Henry spoke without looking up. Benjamin presented charts like a robot. Only Lillian occasionally glanced at Daniel, but her face gave nothing away. Daniel kept his focus. He wasn't looking for apologies. He wanted the truth. Days passed. Reports piled up. But then something flagged the system. An old Trojan virus buried inside a mission file from 2017. Daniel's eyes narrowed. That year stood out. The Mosul campaign, that was when he clashed with another strategist, Mason Delocqua. Delocqua had wanted a full-force sweep that would have his civilians. Daniel blocked it, insisted on containment, saved lives, and made enemies. Delocqua had just enough access back then, enough time, enough motive, and when Benjamin's carelessness hit the wrong link, that old Trojan had finally come alive. That evening, Lillian knocked softly on Daniel's temporary quarters. She didn't say much, just handed him a folder. "You left this," she said, "before you deployed for Ember Echo." There was no apology in her voice, no emotion she hadn't already swallowed, but when Daniel looked into her eyes, he saw it, recognition. 20 years too late, but still real. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Inside the folder were old field notes, a crumpled mission schedule, and a faded photograph. She had kept it. She had kept something. Later that night, a ping hit the monitoring system. Remote access. Someone trying to erase logs. The trace led to a motel 3 miles from base. Cash payment. Fake ID. But the name behind it, Mason Delocqua. Daniel didn't hesitate. He called it in. Within 30 minutes, a strike team breached the room. Delocqua didn't run. Didn't panic. He looked up from his laptop and said, "Took you long enough." In interrogation, Delocqua confessed. The virus, the trigger system, the plan. "I wasn't trying to ruin you," he told Daniel. "Just make sure you stop being invited to the table." He was calm, not arrogant, just bitter. He had bet on Daniel's family unraveling, and it nearly worked. When Benjamin read the transcript, he sat alone for a long time. Then he knocked on Daniel's office door. In his hands, the file. His voice was flat, hollow. "I didn't know what I'd activate." Daniel didn't reply. Benjamin continued, "That always compared me to you, even when you were gone." Daniel looked at him. Not angry. Just tired. "You burned down a forest," he said, "because you were jealous of a tree that grew in the dark." Benjamin didn't deny it, but he didn't crumble either. That was the Grayson way. 2 days later, Benjamin submitted an official statement. He took full responsibility for the breach. He admitted to triggering the link. No criminal charges were filed. His intent had never been sabotage, but the consequences came anyway. 5-year suspension from promotion eligibility. He signed the reprimand without protest. At the task force's final meeting, Henry stood to speak. The room fell silent. He cleared his throat, struggled with the first words. "I owe this team an apology," he said. His voice cracked. "Especially my son." He didn't look at Daniel when he said it, but the weight landed anyway. Benjamin said nothing, but this time, he didn't look away. No resentment. Just understanding. They left the room without tension. Only quiet. Heavy. Shared. A week later, Daniel stood backstage at a regional military conference. The banner above read, "Redefining Shadow Warfare, Intelligence in Post-Conflict Zones." The room was packed. Commanders, analysts, observers. Benjamin sat in the second row, not as a guest of honor. As a student. Daniel had invited him himself. No explanation. Just a note. "It's time to learn what you thought I didn't know." The lights dimmed. Daniel stepped up to the podium. No escort. No fanfare. Just him and the weight of everything he carried. He opened with a quiet truth. Some missions don't get names. Some leaders don't get plaques. The room listened. Not with ears, with minds. Even the ones who used to doubt him now leaned forward. Halfway through, he shared something new. A classified decision from Ember Echo. He had defied direct orders to avoid shelling a site that sheltered children. It had almost ended his career. He looked out across the room and said, "I would make the same choice again." He didn't ask for applause. He asked for understanding. And what he got was silence. But the kind that means someone heard you. At the end, he paused, then turned to the side mic. "I'd like to invite Lieutenant Benjamin Grayson to offer reflections as a next-gen officer." Benjamin stood slowly, his voice cracked, but he didn't falter. "I used to think honor meant being seen." He looked at Daniel. "A real honor means learning from someone, even when it humbles you." There was no ovation, but there didn't need to be. Respect had returned, and this time, no one looked away. The next morning arrived under low fog. Fort Raleigh felt different, still and quiet, like the pause after something irreversible. Daniel stood outside the guest quarters, jacket folded over one arm. There was no briefing ahead, no ribbon cutting, No official task waiting, but still, something felt unfinished. Later that afternoon, he sat alone in the base commissary. The coffee was bitter, the kind that sticks to your tongue. A young cadet, barely old enough to shave, walked over, nerves in his steps. "Sir," he asked, "in war, what's the hardest part?" Daniel didn't smile. He didn't soften his tone. He just looked at the boy for a long moment, then said, "Surviving without turning into a statue." The cadet blinked. Daniel leaned in slightly. It's easy to freeze when pain hits, to wear silence like armor. But the real strength is staying soft in a world that keeps trying to harden you. The boy nodded slowly. He didn't fully understand. Not yet. But one day, he would. That evening, Daniel sent out 3 invitations. One to Henry, one to Lillian. One to Benjamin. No note, no context. Just a time and an address. The old Grayson house, the same beige walls, the same kitchen where Daniel had once eaten Thanksgiving dinner by the sink, while others toasted with wine. This time, he arrived first. He set the table, nothing fancy. 3 plates, 3 glasses, 1 folded napkin per seat. At the head of the table, he sat down, not as a challenge, but because it was finally time to speak. They arrived without knocking. Lillian came in first, carrying a foil-covered dish. Henry followed behind her, hands empty but steady. Benjamin came last. He paused in the doorway a second longer than the others before gently closing the door. No one made small talk. Daniel didn't wait long. "I didn't invite you here for apologies," he said softly. "I invited you to hear the truth from me at last." And then he began. He spoke plainly. The night in western Iraq, when an extraction route collapsed, and he spent 3 days trapped underground. Of the time, he approved an airstrike to save a recon team, knowing there might be civilian injuries. 3 were hurt, none fatally, but the inquiry lasted 8 months. He shared how he once refused a medal so that diplomatic talks could move forward without noise, how silence sometimes did more for peace than ceremony ever could, how that silence had cost him recognition. Invitations. Even his place in the family story. No one interrupted, not once. Even Benjamin kept still, his hands clasped tight in his lap. Lillian dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. Once. No sobbing, no scene, just quiet acknowledgement. Henry kept his eyes low, jaw locked as if every word was pressing deep into his bones. Finally, Henry whispered, "Why didn't you ever tell us?" Daniel looked at him, calm, clear. "Because you never asked," he replied, "and even if you had, I don't think you would have believed me." There was no blame in his voice, just truth. Lillian reached into her purse, pulled out an envelope. Inside were photocopies of old letters, care packages, birthday cards. "I used to think these were your way of saying sorry," she murmured. "I didn't realize they were your way of saying, I'm still here." Daniel nodded gently. Then he reached under the table. He pulled out the email, the one that started the breach. "I didn't keep this to punish you," he told Benjamin. "I kept it to remember something important, that even words we think are invisible can destroy things just as much as bullets." Benjamin didn't speak, but after a moment, he reached across the table, placed his hand on the folder, then slowly slid it back toward Daniel. "I don't need to keep it either," he said. They didn't hug. There was no dramatic music, but something shifted. Daniel looked toward the hallway, where the family portrait still hung slightly crooked. For the first time, he didn't feel erased. He just felt present. Daniel returned to D.C. a week later. His life slipped back into rhythm, quiet, steady, lived on the edges of headlines. He worked part-time as a strategic advisor for NATO, taught the occasional field briefing, lived alone in a modest apartment overlooking the river, still woke at 5:30, still wrote everything by hand in black ink, but something had changed. Once a month, he returned to Fort Raleigh. Not for ceremony. To teach a special course, advanced asymmetry in post-conflict zones. Benjamin sat in the front row. Every time, he took notes, asked hard questions, never asked for approval, never tried to act like he had lived what Daniel had. But he listened. One afternoon, after class, he approached quietly, held out a slim binder. Inside, a draft proposal to reform how mission debriefs were handled, based on Daniel's own field experience. "I don't need your name on it," Benjamin said. "I just want to know what you think." Daniel flipped through it. Made no edits. On the cover, He wrote one word in black ink. Advanced. Lily and started writing once a month. Real letters, not emails. Sometimes only a sentence. Saw your interview. Hope you're resting. Henry began something subtler at the officers' club. When asked about his children, he stopped saying my son, who disappeared. Now he said, my son, the one who helps write NATO doctrine. No fanfare. Just truth. One day, Daniel passed through the old house. On the hallway wall, something caught his eye. A picture, one he hadn't seen before. His own face, restored into the frame. No caption. No announcement. Just there again. Between Lucas's graduation and Benjamin's award ceremony, back in the story, that evening, Daniel walked along the gravel path by the barracks. The wind was light. He could hear drills in the distance, far enough not to disturb the quiet. Footsteps approached behind him. Benjamin. He carried a small plastic container, awkward and unbalanced in his hands. Inside, a cake. The frosting was clumsy, letters uneven, but 3 words stood out in shaky blue icing. General, brother, teacher. No speech, no tears. Just the cake. Daniel looked at it for a long moment, then back at Benjamin. And nodded once. It was enough. He didn't need applause. He didn't need medals. He didn't need the history books to write him in. He only needed this. The knowledge that someone who once misunderstood him now finally saw him fully. Some battles never get recorded. Some victories don't sound like gunfire. They sound like chairs pulled closer at the dinner table. Like binders handed over without ego. Like slow, steady nods in quiet classrooms. Daniel never asked for recognition. He only ever asked for the truth. And now, at last, he had it. Not in headlines. Not in grand speeches, but in a shared silence and a new way forward.